Welcome to Spotlight Sessions, where we shine a
What's
light
your
on
story?
incredible. What does accessibility mean to you?
What's your mission? Welcome all to accessiBe's Spotlight Sessions, where we shine a light on incredible individuals and organizations and the work that they do. I am your host, Josh Basil. I'm a C4-5 quadriplegic, paralyzed below my shoulders, and a power wheelchair user. I'm the Community Relations Manager at accessiBe and a passionate disability rights advocate and trial attorney focused on breaking down barriers to access and inclusion for people with disabilities. Today on accessiBe Spotlight Sessions, we're joined by Casey DePriest, the founder and CEO of Optimal Rhythms Incorporated. Welcome, Casey.
Thank you, Josh. It's so nice to be with you today.
So nice to have you on the spotlight. So let's jump right into it. Tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Sure. Well, I'm a board certified music therapist, trained in neurologic music therapy, and I've worked in disability services for many years, over 25 years now. And much of that time I worked as a music therapist. I developed my own practice and started hiring additional board certified music therapists. And I've been an Indiana Medicaid waiver provider. So a lot of our referrals come through that Medicaid waiver system of individuals with all different types of disabilities. But our specialty has been autism. And in 2014, after several years of approaching autism the way that I was trained and the way that I thought I should, we actually started a nonprofit organization called Optimal Rhythms, which it really focuses on supporting families, and particularly autistic students who have complex communication or motor differences. And we do that based on a lot of really helpful neuroscience that has come out in the last 20 years, but really more recently, it's really gotten the focus that is showing us that at least 40% of all autistic individuals are non-speaking. Most of the world would call that nonverbal, but I prefer non-speaking because we really believe that speech is the issue, not cognitive differences or language delays. It's really that person's ability to express themselves in their body. And that's not widely understood, unfortunately. So we developed this organization to bring that information to the forefront to help not only parents get that information, but also community members, educators, medical professionals, and so on, so that individuals could get the supports and accommodations that they truly need to have a successful life.
Thank you so much for sharing all of that. And I always love asking what is a memorable story or event that you've put on or experienced with your times working at Optimal Rhythms that really had a lasting impact on you?
Well, this is a great question. I have a lot of different stories I could tell. We've seen a lot of different successes, but I would say one of the most impactful moments for me was really early in the process, right? When we decided to start our nonprofit to bring additional services to the community. I was still working with individuals who I had worked with for several years in my practice. And one in particular that sticks out, his name is Josh, and he is now a fairly widely recognized self-advocate, but he's completely non-speaking. And for years, I treated him in a way that I was taught, and just, kind of kept doing repetitive things, trying to get him to be able to demonstrate his knowledge. And he really struggled to do that, but I didn't understand that it was his body that was the problem, right? And so when I started to understand that more, he was part of that learning process for me. Once he became, once communication became available to him, and we learned different ways to support his communication through spelling as opposed to speech, he said to me one day, Miss Casey, I can look at you or I can listen to you. Which do you want? And that was really significant because I had always thought, well, my role is to help him have eye contact so he can have social skills. But that wasn't how his neurology worked. And he taught me that he didn't really need to look at me, to listen. He was always listening. And the next thing, one of the next things that he communicated is, he said, Miss Casey, you have to start a school or I'm not going to get an education. I'm going to age out of school and not get an education. And so how do you argue with that, right? So one of the first projects that we started within our organization, Optimal Rhythms, was Access Academy. And that has been a therapeutic day school that has grown and reached a larger number of people now because of his vision for that. You know, he believed that I could do that, even though I wasn't necessarily an educator. I was a therapist, but I was really starting to understand the need for individuals to have a place where they could feel safe at school and where they could get the supports and accommodations they needed for their physical disability, so that their intellect could expand and you know, so they would have the opportunity to learn. So that's one of my favorite stories, is you know, kind of put us on the track of where we were headed as an organization.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that. And
Mm-hmm.
how do people, tell us about your website, tell us how people can sign up, any of the eligibility requirements?
Sure. Well, for our school, we have both a private school, therapeutic day school, that is K through 12. And then we also have more of a home education program, which tends to work for a lot of individuals that just aren't able to get the public school, either to recognize their mode of communication or recognize their need for true academics and not just repetitive things over and over again in a self-contained classroom. And then, so we developed this home education program called Access to Academics. Both of those programs can be viewed on our website at www.optimalrhythms.org. And you can always call our office as well. We're located in Newburgh, Indiana, and our number there is 812-490-9401. We also have a Facebook page and an Instagram account where we post a lot of different resources for families who are looking for something more. We really do have a neurologic approach as opposed to a behavioral approach. And a lot of families are looking for choice or an option outside of the behavioral system.
Options are good.
Mm-hmm.
I like options. And what first comes to mind when you hear the word accessibility?
That's a great question. Our school's named as Access, and for us, that stands for Assuming Competence Can Ensure Student Success. And when I think about accessibility, I think about that people have to be understood for their strengths in order for opportunities to be made available. And I think a lot of accessibility is just recognizing that people need opportunities and making those opportunities there so that so then we can start thinking about how are we going to help support people to access those opportunities. And I think that's just such a big issue. I think if people are misunderstood or underestimated, then the opportunities don't come because people don't even think they want those opportunities.
That's a great answer. And what's one thing you wish people knew about autistic people what's something you can tell us about autistic people that you wish people knew more about?
Thank you for that question. I think it's a really important question. I think the main thing is I want people to understand that autism is not an intellectual disability. For the most part, autistic individuals are extremely bright. They're extremely perceptive. They have a lot of empathy, although that oftentimes is misunderstood or miscalculated because of the way they respond. They're very focused on justice much of the time, which is so important. But they don't oftentimes have the opportunities that they need to either be supported in their communication, to have co-regulation support, to be able to regulate after years of being misunderstood or underestimated. So I really want us to stop thinking about it as a behavioral problem or an intellectual problem and really recognize that it is oftentimes just a brain-body disconnect that they consistently, all these individuals now are describing this challenge of being able to control their bodies, even though they know what they want to do, they know what they want to say, they just can't get their bodies to do it in a reliable way, including speech.
And if everyone could do one bit more to make the world more accessible and inclusive, what would that be?
Focus on strengths. I think we really need to stop focusing so much on deficits, stop focusing on what people can't do, and focus on what they can, and then create opportunities for them to do those things.
I love that. No, and I live by that as well. If I focused on all the things I could not do as somebody paralyzed below my shoulders, you know what? There would be a list of a million things, but I choose to focus on the million different ways I can do it. And it's different. It can be fun. It can be meaningful. And it's life is a beautiful thing when you put yourself out there with a willingness to try and a little creativity. But most anything is still possible.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's why I'm so honored to be here with you today, because I know that you've taken that approach in your own life. And I think it's such a great example of what is possible.
Thank you for that. And what do you think is one of the biggest gaps within kind of the business world of prioritizing kind of access and inclusion?
Mm-hmm. Well, from my perspective, when I see opportunities available for employment, oftentimes the jobs that are available don't match with the person's strengths. In fact, for instance, a lot of the individuals that I support and work with on a daily basis really struggle to get their bodies to move and do things that are intentional, but their minds are so open and so ready, to help. They're such great problem solvers. They're, great writers if they have, accessibility to communication. And so I think we need to move away from thinking that people with, quote, a disability can only do very simple manual types of tasks, because many of those tasks require a lot of high physical demand to do them and very little cognitive engagement, right? Very little intelligence to do that. And it's just not a fit. And so when we look at, like in Indiana, we look at vocational rehabilitation services and various different things that are supposed to be community supports to help students transition out of school and into the working world. And I just see so much failure. Things just don't work. Job coaches get frustrated because the people that they're trying to coach just aren't motivated to do those jobs, or they're not physically able to do those jobs successfully. But yet there aren't a lot of opportunities opening up for people to use their strengths. So I think that that's something I would love to see, love to work towards, in partnerships with employers, of helping them to identify problems that they have that can be solved by these really intellectual beings that are anxious and willing to contribute. They want to contribute to this world, but the focus needs to be on their strengths.
That can make a huge difference when you're able to have that perspective, that approach, and a welcoming environment that embraces that.
Mm-hmm.
And what about when it comes to the brands of the world? What do you think they could be doing better regarding access and inclusion?
Well, technology has come so far, and it's really benefited so many individuals who have motor challenges or communication challenges. So I think that there can be more accessibility built into technology to continue to move us in that direction of making them more accessible. I work with kids that have motor disabilities, dyspraxia or apraxia as a part of their autism. And there are AAC devices that are built for them. However, they're extremely, sometimes they're just not accessible because you have to go through so many screens to get to the words that you want, or they're pre-programmed. And the individuals that I work with don't need pre-programmed language. I mean, sometimes the words that they choose through their spelling are words I have to look up in the dictionary because they're not my words. They're not words that I necessarily use in my own vocabulary, but the way that they use them are perfect and ideal to the situation. But those devices, those things that I think are being built. A lot of money is going into for them to be built for the purpose of people that don't have speech to be able to have communication. But if they're not focusing on their strengths, if they're focusing on their presumed deficits, thinking that all they need are core words, it's just not a good fit. So I would love to see us, again, really listen to autistic people and listen to individuals that have these complex communication difficulties and find out what they say they need and go from there.
I love it. Casey, thank you so much for being our guest today on accessiBe's Spotlight Sessions. Really enjoyed the conversations.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
And to all of our guests, thank you so much for staying to the end to accessiBe's Spotlight Sessions. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and follow us at accessiBe_community. And as always, thank you so much for being on this journey with us. Bye, everyone.